So, let's do that now. Out of all the movies in Pixar's lineup, Ratatouille probably has the most unconventional climax. And I don't necessarily mean unconventional in terms of weirdness, I more so mean compared to the climaxes in other Pixar movies. Most of their climaxes are a lot more action-oriented, whether it be to defeat a villain or to combat an outside force that's preventing the main goal from being achieved. But I'm glad Ratatouille is a rare instance of Pixar not going this route. This climax is Remy and his rat buddies cooking a meal for our main antagonist, and yet it manages to carry the same amount of suspense as an action sequence. In fact, I'd argue it carries a bit more. Many of the external conflicts that come from this movie directly stem from each of the characters' internal struggles, all of which feel easily relatable and identifiable. Remy's dedication as a culinary artist and longing to join a world unwilling to adapt. Linguini having to deal with the raised expectations of being the son of Gusteau's despite not having any cooking knowledge. Colette's steadfast ideals on being formulaic with recipes being challenged by Remy in a way nobody has before. And the cold, cynical, and egotistical viewpoints presented by Anton Ego. All of these are woven in so beautifully into this climax. After Gusteau's has finally garnered popularity again due to Remy's impeccable cooking, Ego feels the need to prove that his negative perspective on this restaurant and Gusteau's ideals are objective, truly living up to his name. And because this runs so counter to the movie's main message, it makes perfect sense why this movie would have to end with him being the final boss. The characters are put in a position where shifting this man's perspective seems impossible. Linguini and Remy are left alone once it's revealed that Remy was the one that brought the restaurant so much success. Everyone abandons them, unwilling to accept the idea that a rat can be a chef, except for Colette, who comes back to help them after seeing Gusteau's famous saying on a book as she begins to drive away. It's consistent with her steadfastness in her beliefs to do this, and it's really satisfying to see how she won't make an exception for anyone it applies to, even a rat. So, they agree to serve Anton Ego Ratatouille, with a little bit of improvisation with the recipe from Remy, and we watch as Ego takes a bite. Right from the start, one of the most excellent things about this scene is how it's done without any use of dialogue. Given how we have no knowledge on what Ego's life was like before he was a food critic, it'd be easy to give this scene a little bit of vocal exposition, but they opt not to do that. It's carried solely by the visuals and now the quiet yet calm music that seamlessly shifts in pitch. Now, this flashback doesn't take up very much time, clocking in at only 15 seconds of screen time, and it's not even in the form of a montage. It's one small moment from this man's past, one memory, and yet we're able to find out just about everything we need to know about him. I mentioned the sepia tone in my first video, and I think it really signifies how this was a much happier time in Ego's life. It strengthens the sentimental tone that the scene is going for. This memory consists of Ego enjoying a simple meal cooked by his mother, and after he tastes it, we then zoom back to the present. But why this meal? Why is it that the movie decides that this specific dish, prepared by a rat, would be the one that softened Ego's stone-cold heart? One detail that I want to point out is Colette's initial reaction to Remy's proposed dish.
Ratatouille? It's a peasant dish. Are you sure you want to serve this to Ego?
So I did a little bit of Googling, and a peasant dish, or peasant food, is actually a term that was used during the Middle Ages for simpler food that was thought to only be eaten by the lowest of man. Yeah, even back then, capitalism was ruining people's lives. So Ego's nostalgia for this meal somewhat gives us the hint that he grew up poor. But it also implies that food acted as a comforter during this time in his life. You probably wouldn't guess that due to Ego's current persona though, and it makes perfect sense why Colette would be skeptical to serve this to him. The fate of the restaurant is in the balance, and you would think that this well-recognized and respected critic would only want a meal of the highest standards. And yet, he's so surprised by how much he enjoys the meal that he receives. His facial expression, the slow motion as his pen drops, and the way that his face gets less pale after his first bite. It's such great attention to detail. It's also important to note how Ego initially approaches this review. He goes in expecting not to be convinced, but by the end, he's no longer eating this meal as a critic. just being able to enjoy it for what it is. And again, this didn't come as a result of some gourmet meal with all these fancy ingredients. It came from something that was simply delicious. I mean, he's eating with his fingers by the end. That's why this scene, and quite frankly, this movie, is so powerful. It's able to convey so many of these ideas through the visuals alone, and solidified Anton Ego as one of the most well-written characters in Pixar's entire pantheon. A moment of brilliance, one of many, in this cinematic masterpiece.